Hi, everybody, and welcome to week 5 of Social and Economic Justice. This week, we will again be looking at historical trends in social welfare policy. This week, we will begin in the 1930s with the New Deal, and Tratner is going to take us all the way up to the 1990s. So once again, we will be covering a lot of historical ground very quickly. Before we do that, I wanted to make a few comments about your week 3 assignments. If you remember back in week 3, the main discussion post involved selecting 2 essay questions to respond to that related to the Tratner readings. I wanted to say that everyone did a really great job with that assignment. I was really happy with everybody's responses. Whether you chose to answer the question about the role of friendly visitors, or whether you chose to describe the Elizabethan Poor Law and its implications, or whether you took on the concept of the principle of less eligibility, or you chose the question that dealt with Dorothea Dix, and there were a number of other questions people chose as well. Those are the main ones that I remember several people selecting. You all did a really great job, so I was really happy to see that. Regarding your week 4 assignments, I am looking forward very much to reading everybody's papers. I just wanted to let you know that this week it may take me a little bit longer to get grades back to you than it typically does. I usually try to get you your grades and feedback by Wednesday or Thursday at the latest, but with the papers it is likely going to take me a bit longer this week, so you most may not have a response from me until Saturday or Sunday. So if it gets to be Wednesday or Thursday and you don't see a grade or feedback, don't panic. You will get a grade. I just want to make sure that I'm able to give the papers the time and attention that they deserve, because I know that students put a lot of time and effort into doing them. So I want to make sure I'm giving you that back. So moving on to week 5, as I've done in previous weeks, I just wanted to give you several overarching themes to be thinking about as you're reading. And we'll start, and this is nothing new, I think you've seen this slide or some version of it previously. Be thinking about, as you're reading, the different views of poverty that exist in different periods of time and how these inform the response to poverty. How is poverty conceptualized in the Great Depression versus during the Great Society? One view of poverty that's really important to note in the Tratner text that comes a few chapters in is the idea of the culture of poverty theory. Pay attention to that section and understand what was meant by the culture of poverty and how that impacted the response to poverty. It's really a key idea that had some pretty dangerous implications. So be aware of that for sure. A second theme has to do with the role of social workers and this idea of cause versus function. So Tratner says, in the meantime, many social workers saw or were forced to see that destitution resulted from social and economic factors which the needy could not control. As a result, they began to engage in self-criticism and to call for a renewed commitment to social reform, to the cause orientation they largely had abandoned in the 1920s in favor of the functional one. So there's this sort of ongoing tension within the social work profession of whether or not social work is committed to this sort of functional purpose of focusing on the individual, so through things such as casework or counseling, versus being committed to social reform and larger environmental and structural and political issues. So this tension between cause and function, pay attention to how that sort of ebbs and flows across the decades that Tratner is discussing this week. A third theme is that of institutionalized racism. As you're reading, be aware of how this is evident as we move through each of the decades Tratner discusses. And Tratner says, just as wealth was inequitably distributed, so too was poverty. So be paying attention as certain policies are enacted at how racism sort of continued to be institutionalized within them. A fourth theme is that of social insurance versus public assistance. So make sure that you're able to identify some examples of social insurance programs versus public assistance programs. Understand the key differences between these types of programs, and understand which acts in U.S. history have defined these and how these definitions have evolved. And what we're really talking about here is, as our social welfare system has evolved, there have been two different lines of assistance that have emerged. And there's one line, which is the social insurance line, that includes programs such as Social Security that are much more universal in nature, right? So the only requirement to be eligible for Social Security is that you be of age to receive it, so over age 65. Contrast that with public assistance programs, right? So programs, for example, take something like food stamps or cash assistance, programs that are means tested. These are programs that have much more rigidly defined eligibility criteria, and they're defined very differently. So we sort of have these two separate and probably not equal systems of social welfare operating in our country. So be aware of those differences. Fifth theme is that of federal responsibility versus local responsibility. So you remember back in week 2, we talked and read quite a bit about the idea of social responsibility versus personal responsibility. And this is sort of a similar tension with local responsibility, relating to the responsibility of the town or could be the state for the provision of social welfare and responding to poverty, versus a larger federal governmental response. So this is sort of a subset of social responsibility, where we see federal versus local and state responsibility in this sort of constant state of tension that evolves throughout history. So Tretner says the Social Security Act also established a new alignment of responsibility in the field of public welfare. It marked the beginning of a policy of federal aid to the states upon a permanent basis for regular, recurring social work, closing the door on 3 centuries of the poor law and its principle of local responsibility. So with the Social Security Act, we see the federal government for the first time really taking on this large, very large role with regard to the provision of social welfare. However, there continues to be sort of, again, a tension between federal and local responsibility. And you can see some of that in theme 6 in terms of this ongoing tension between the deserving versus the undeserving poor, and how we define who is eligible for social welfare programs. So Tretner says the residuals, the needy who failed to fit into these categories, were thrust back to the states and counties for their assistance. And you'll read more about what that's in relation to as you read the text. However, what this statement really demonstrates is that even though the federal government has assumed some responsibility, when individuals don't fit into that, the responsibility still falls back to the states and the counties and sort of local entities to provide assistance. So a lot of these themes are all interrelated, and they're really just to give you, again, some structure and a bit of a roadmap as you're reading through Tretner. I am really looking forward to reading people's responses to the assignments this week. If anyone has any questions as you're reading Tretner or doing the assignments, please feel free to email me or post questions in the Ask the Instructor forum. I'd be glad to answer any questions anybody has. And I look forward to reading everyone's assignments, and I will talk to everybody soon. Thank you.